Welcome to the Green Living Gurus. Today, our subject matter is organic wine, one of my all-time favorite subject matters. And it's so fun talking about organic wine. And I have somebody here today joining me on this subject matter because I can talk about it, but she can talk about it 1,000 more knowledgeable than I am. I can talk about a lot of wine that I drink, but when it comes to the facts about organic wine, I do know some, but she really has taught me a lot about organic wine. And there's so much to know about it. And it's so fun finding out all the different factors that go into organic farming, biodynamics, sustainability, and these are all words that Paula is going to educate us on this evening. And so Paula, welcome.
Thank you so much, Therese. I'll try not to be too wordy. You'll have to get the cane and pull it off. But
the wine bottle.
There's so much to say about this, and I'm so excited to be on your show and talk about it because it really is a mission of our shop and something that I feel like is within, we talk about what is within your control when you want to help the environment, you want to help the planet, and you want to be living healthier yourself and what you take into your body. So there's things you can control, like buying local, buying organic food, supporting your local farmers who are raising animals humanely. There's all those kinds of things that you can look at that are pretty easy. You can make the choice not to buy Purdue chicken, but get your chicken from a local butcher who's, buying it from a farmer, a real farmer. So with me, we have our wine selection is all the wines are made from sustainably grown grapes. So there's 3 levels of farming for wine. Sustainable is kind of that entry level. People often ask me what's the difference. And then going up a notch is organic farming. And then sort of the top, most rigorous farming method would be biodynamics. And now, and we'll touch on it a little bit, there's a huge trend for permaculture farming, which is a very hands-off farming. But biodynamic and this permaculture farming have a lot in common. So we'll talk about that. So I decided when I opened my shop in 2015.
So let me back up a little bit because I didn't even tell them that you have your own organic wine store in Buffalo, New York. And I am like on speed dial for her wine store. And Paula's last name is Paradise, right?
Right.
How can you get a better last name than Paradise? And so Paula Paradise owns a wine store. And backing up just a tiny little bit, Paula, because not only do you have a wine store, but you were in the food industry and you've worked for a very large wine company in the Western New York, Buffalo region that actually, weirdly enough, is why I know about organic wine, because we followed you to that wine store on Transit Road. I think you were there because you were known as the organic wine person at Premier, if I remember correctly. My family, my sisters and I used to go there. There was only like a handful of wine you could buy. But one other thing I just wanted to mention briefly, we don't have to go into it, but you are also a cancer survivor. Yes. And so you have a lot of knowledge when it comes to chemicals and chemicals that we eat and chemicals that we drink and chemicals that we put on our body. So I know you have your own wine store, but you have so many different things here that I just wanted to point out because it's so worthwhile for people to understand. You didn't just open up an organic wine store.
Well, I can give like a brief history, but while you're talking, what I think to set the context for people, there's a beautiful Jane Goodall quote, and it's not verbatim, but basically what she is saying is that we're going to look back at this time of industrialized farming and we're going to wonder how we could have been so primitive to think that growing our food in poison was a good idea.
That just gave me chills, just hearing that.
Like that, when people say to me, but organic food, that doesn't taste right, or does that taste the same? It's like our mentality has become so estranged from how we grow food, which is keeping the soil healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Once you start to strip away the health of the soil, you have to add chemicals.
Right.
And you're actually making the soil dependent upon synthetics that eventually will, ruin the agricultural element altogether. So my history, I grew up in a restaurant. My grandmother owned a restaurant, and I love to eat and I love to cook. So I didn't grow up in any organic household, but we grew up with all of the frozen dinners and everything that was available. But I had a palate that liked good food. That drove me to become a cook and a chef. And I eventually worked in some very fine restaurants and decided I want to be a pastry chef. So I started to have a knowledge of food and think about where it was coming from. And so at the same time, food politics was becoming quite well known. The Rolling Stones did a very disturbing article called Belly of the Beast about industrialized farming. So it was easy choice for me to make the commitment to buy meats and from butchers and local butchers that were sourcing from humanely raised farms and farms where they didn't treat their animals with hormones and all kinds of other things. So that was the beginning of it. And when I got into the wine business, I worked for Premier Wines for Bert Notorious, who was a real champion of my wine education and a mentor. And he kind of let me go with that. And so I started researching all the wines that he was buying. And I found that the wines that I liked and the staff liked the best, these were all the wine nerds, they were small family wineries. And they were the ones that tasted the best, that had the most character. And the ones that were from large wineries where they're mass produced and maybe 1 million bottles made began to taste very homogenized to me without character and almost a weird texture. And so I started to research it, and people say to me, well, isn't all wine natural? And actually, no. There's up to 75 additives that you can put in wine in the US, including mega purple food coloring, artificial acidifiers, sugar, and all kinds of chemicals. So that is part of it. The one thing that a lot of people know of, the buzzword, is sulfur, which there's a lot of misconception about. Sulfur is actually a natural byproduct of fermentation, and it occurs in 10 to 20 parts per million naturally. So all wine has a low level of sulfur. It only affects the taste when it goes above 60, 70 parts per million. So sulfur is really actually an uncommon allergen. Only 2% of the population, humans, have allergic reaction to sulfur. So it's actually a big misconception that if you're getting a headache or you have, some kind of allergic reaction to wine, that it's the sulfur.
And you hear that a lot.
You hear it so much, but in some of the mass-produced wines in the US, the legal limit is 350 parts per million.
Oh.
So actually, that could be affecting you.
Right.
Europe is a lower level. I think it's 250 in Europe. Now, in the wines I carry, most of the producers are just putting enough sulfur in to stabilize it because it's an antibacterial. And it's also an antioxidant. So if they're shipping or whatever, they might put a little sulfur in there to stabilize the wine. Natural wines, which is the new trend, they are 0 sulfur additions. So you're just getting that 10 to 20. And some of those wines, if they're not treated really carefully in the winery, they can taste a little bit like kombucha because they are actually still alive with those probiotics.
Right. I'm still fermenting, right? Which
feels like, you know, we're not allowed to say this in the liquor business, but it almost feels like it's good for you when you drink it. I feel that way in my own wine journey and development of my palate, that the more I got into drinking natural wines, I didn't have a hangover. I could drink more. I guess that's a good thing, without feeling it.
Right.
And if I were to drink a glass of, like, you know, this very kind of pedestrian mass produced stuff, I would feel it in a second now in my sinuses. And, you know, I'm just more sensitive to it. But so the sulfur, it can be a good thing for wine in small amounts.
Oh, right, right. I agree.
And there's no universal laws right now regulating this. So natural wine has become very trendy in the big cities, but there are no laws that are actually providing guidelines. There's a conference called RAW, R-A-W, that's worldwide, and they seem to stick to anything below 60, 70 parts per million of sulfur will be in the natural wine category. But otherwise, they're not allowed to put any other additives, and many of them don't filter or fine the wine. So you're getting maybe some sediment, some cloudiness, but also a lot of winemakers, you know, think about if you're a cook, it's like straining your wine and you're removing a lot of flavor. And the winemakers really take offense to that because they've done everything they can to bring you what they consider the flavor of their land and terroir, and now you're going to filter it. And so a lot of winemakers who are kind of righteous about not filtering. So sometimes you will get a wine that's a little cloudy.
So why organic? Let's talk about that a little bit. And I think the soil is really, besides, I know the soil is important. I've been to a bunch of different organic wineries. Frog's Leap is one that I can remember I went to in California and how they did it. And they're biodynamic, if I remember correctly. And Bunzinger I went to, but I know I love all your wine. And you know, I just go into your store and I don't even have to think about anything I'm buying. You tell me, I know I'm getting the wine, I'm getting either organic, sustainable, or biodynamic wine. And so for people that really don't understand, why is it so important for people to drink organic wine?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's about the soil. So 25% of all carbon emissions, which is causing the greenhouse effect that we're struggling with right now and climate change, is due to agricultural processes that we're currently employing. Around the turn of the century, late 19th century, early 20th century, when industrial farming techniques came into being and we moved away from the way we had farmed for centuries and started to make it a more mechanical process farming. That's when we got into trouble. We stopped thinking about the farm as a total ecosystem. So when you talk about organic, why organic? It's, well, there's no other answer. You're going to kill the planet if you don't start going back to these types of treatments of the soil. You can't put chemical waste in water for years and years and then expect to drink it. So if you're going to put pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides into the soil for years and years and years, you're going to end up with a desert where nothing can grow. because at a certain point, no matter how much artificial fertilizers and treatments you put into the soil, you won't be able to grow anything at a certain point. So farmers have realized this, and a lot of them who maybe embraced these methods in the beginning because it upped their yields temporarily, they were able to produce more grapes or more oranges or whatever it was, have seen how it affected their own health and the health of their land, and have said, no, you know, we need to figure this out. And in fact, when you have a healthy, thriving ecosystem with diversity of animals, diversity of plants, diversity of pests, they balance. So when you get out of balance, that's when you're going to have infestation of some sort of beetle or bug. You know, that's when you're going to have a problem with mold or mildew. There's ways of preventing these things. And typically an organic farm, it takes 3 to 4 years to transition to biodynamics, which is about treating the farm as a complete whole system. So it's all about the microorganisms that live in the soil and keeping that world healthy and alive. And those things come up through the plant and into your grapes. And you can
so meaning anybody that treats their non-organic, say wine, they treat their grapes with pesticides and herbicides, that eventually gets into the people are drinking that, correct?
You can't wash it off. It doesn't get washed off.
Okay, that's important. So I wonder, and I don't know this, and I don't know if you know this, but if you tested wine, can you test wine and see what chemicals are in them? You can.
And you know, we can only do the best we can do. And I'm trying to plant the seed in people's minds to think about this, but it's not a perfect world. And there's been tests in, unfortunately, you know, California, I think of John Steinbeck's and the whole idea of the Garden of Eden, like California, when it was the pioneers were there, the agricultural richness, you know, it's where most of our food is still coming from. But unfortunately, because of this industrialized farming, even the organic farmers are getting blow off of pesticides. So they will test their vineyards and the organic grapes have pesticides on them, granted in much lower levels.
Right.
So it's kind of, which, you know, you're getting maybe not as perfect a grape as you want, but you're doing it, and maybe you can convince your neighbor to switch to that kind of farming.
Yeah, I've read about that a little bit. I know there's some battles going on even in the food industry and even with GMOs and some of those being
yes,
it's
they
just
blow around in the air, and they land in your vineyard. So it's really more of impact if you find a region where you have like-minded people. And where you're finding that mostly at this point is in Europe, because those farmers live in the vineyard. Their homes are there. They're multi-generational, you know, vineyard growers and winemakers. So they are concerned, and there's story after story about, you know, their own health being affected, and deciding, look, we can't spray anymore. We got to figure this out. So when you have a whole region that is working towards organic farming, that's when it really makes an impact. And you see that even in countries now, it's not at the level we're talking, but South Africa, 85% of all the wines are certified sustainable. So if you can see the little tag on the neck of the bottle and the website to go to on the South African wines, and they will tell you exactly what that means. It's not organic farming the way I'm talking about it. They might be still using synthetics, but they're moving in that direction. and they are concerned with things like water runoff. So that wastewater from vineyards that's going in our rivers, what's in that water? And those certified sustainable, like in Oregon, they have this salmon live certification because it's affecting the salmon, this runoff from the vineyards. So though that's a start, it's an awareness, and it will make people want to move, I think, in that direction. And that's, so in our small way at Paradise Wine, we're trying to get people to move in that direction and think about it.
So I'm lucky to have you as my local wine shop.
We're lucky to have you.
And thank you. And I get questions, asked all what type. They want me to give them a list of wine to buy if they're in, Connecticut, and I know you ship in New York State. So if anybody's listening to New York State, she can ship anywhere in New York State. And you tell her what she likes, you give her a price point, she'll ship you a box. It's great. But what advice? I always think, if I don't know wine on a menu, let's per se, I always go to France or Italy, because I feel like I go to a Bordeaux usually, like an old world wine, because I feel like or Italian, I feel like I'm taking a shot in the dark, but you never know. What's your thought on that?
I agree with you, especially if you're in a restaurant. For years, I would just order the Côte d'Aron, because it's food friendly, it goes with a lot, and they're usually decent quality. Italy, absolutely. Spain, you can usually, it depends on the producer, of course, but you can usually find something that's going to taste good and have some character. And so it's hard to pick when you're in a restaurant, but I think if you stick with a French or Italian, you're probably going to get something interesting. And the way we work is we try to work with individuals. So if I know you like a nice, heavy body, rich red, then I'm going to keep my eyes open for, okay, you like California Cab. Well, I just got in a Southern Rhone Syrah that's pretty rich and full, and maybe you'll like that. And then we try to introduce you to something else so we can move you into an area that is farming more with organic methods.
Right. And I don't want to put down California at all either, because I love a lot of California wines. And I know you have California, American wines, there are, but I think you just have to educate yourself a little bit on it. I was just in a wine store actually today, because they know I'm out of town, but they had a little section of organic wine. And so if you have a wine store, wherever you shop, ask. They might have a little section, but most likely, and I'm sure if you're in a big wine store, you can ask if any of the other bottles are organic or sustainable or biodynamic, and typically somebody in that wine store will know. And this wine store had little green labels around, so you might ask a little bit wherever you do shop, because there could potentially be more wine than just a little corner that has organic wine, because there's
unfortunately a lot of retailers don't even know who their organic producers are, because a lot of them are small and don't go for the certification. So they're working that way, but they don't have certification. It's not on the label. So that's what we do. We research everything. We work with small importers. There's really not an easy answer to this. That's why I opened a shop, because you have to know where the wine is coming from. And the importers I deal with visit the winery twice a year. Now we're talking to them. We have the winemaker on our Instagram live during COVID from France or from Spain. And we know these people. We have pictures from the importer, or we might go visit them ourselves. So it isn't an easy answer. And I wouldn't I'm not putting down California. I was just, you know, with a wine restaurant menu, talking about that.
Right.
We have a lot of friends who are farming organically and biodynamically in California, and we have a guy, very well-known natural winemaker, coming on our Instagram live in a week or so, Chris Brockway from Brock Cellars. So we really respect anybody who cares about the soil and producing a wine that is authentic and alive.
Yep, and I mentioned Frog's Leap, which I had a bottle of that on Friday night. It's one of my, I've been following organic wine for about 30 years. I want to just say it was hard to find organic wine, but Frog's Leap was one of the first ones that really leaped into the organic wine. Haha. But they were one of the first ones that really, and I was so excited to go there and learn the whole process and showing us how they utilize the bugs to help the wines grow. And it was just fascinating to me. So I really enjoyed that. Okay, so biodynamic, you touched on it a little bit. People really don't understand biodynamic. If you can explain that a little bit.
Well, biodynamics started with Rudolf Steiner, who was born in 1861 and lived to 1925. And he was a genius. He actually was the founder of Waldorf schools. He was a prolific writer and thinker. And he, it was right around the time, the turn of the century, when mechanized farming was just starting. And these farmers came to him and said, you know, we're really concerned about the use of chemicals that are being pushed on us by these big ag companies that wanted to promote their way of farming. And so there was a consortium of farmers, and they brought in Rudolf Steiner, who wrote this book on agriculture. And he talked about, you know, going back to farming the way the peasants farmed. He grew up as a boy in the Austrian Alps watching how the peasants farmed. He called it intuitive science. And it incorporates, you have to have animals on the farm, not just grapes. It can't be a monoculture. It's a healthier environment when you're growing a variety. So they might have vegetables, they'll have grapes, they'll have farm animals, which provide manure, but also they'll have their own compost. And he developed these homeopathic treatments for vines. So in biodynamic viticulture, the farming of grapes, there's no chemicals used on the vines. There's 9 treatments, I think, and one of the most simple ones is chamomile tea is one of the treatments on the vines. So they make their treatments and they'll spray the vines or treat the soil. And actually his economic ideas in the 1980s was embraced by farmers in New England and the Northeast. And they started the original CSAs, the farming
shared agriculture, yeah.
So our CSAs are also go back to Rudolf Steiner's thinking. So he was kind of a really interesting out there person.
Ahead of his time, that's for sure.
Really ahead of his time, but the biodynamic farming also is about expressing the land in the grape. So wine is unique in that it tastes different depending on where the grape is grown. You can have the same grape grown in one region of Italy and like say Brunello from Montalcino, right? Brunello is a clone of Sangiovese, and you can have Sangiovese from Chianti. And they'll taste completely different. There'll be similarities, but you'll be able to taste that difference. And it's all coming from the soil. Different rocks, shale, schist, granite, limestone, those all affect the taste of the wine. So if you're covering that up, you lose your sense of place. And for winemakers, it's very important to convey that sense of taste through the bottle. So that's part of the, the really good chefs who want to use local ingredients and fresh ingredients. It's the same idea with winemaking.
Very interesting. I love the chamomile. Chamomile is healing, and however they use it, but that's interesting. I love that.
Nettle is another one they use.
Yeah, interesting. Now, I have a question. This is nothing to really do with organic wine, but when you see on a label that it's berry flavor or leather or vanilla,
Yeah.
You see all, some weird, the leather freaks me out a little bit. Where does that come from?
It could be a real sale killer.
Right?
Okay, so it's all metaphor. And actually one time when I was working at Premier, there'll be little write-up descriptions of the wine. And one of these Cabernets said, chocolate, blackberry.
Right.
And I was working at Premier and the guy came up to me and he goes, I'm looking for that Cabernet that has chocolate in it. I was like, buddy, we don't put any chocolate in the wine. So it's a metaphor, but I came into this very intimidated by that language. When I made the transition in my career to wine, I was so intimidated by that. But the more I taste around people, and we'll all just say what comes into our head, and there's kits with scents, little oils that you can smell rosemary and then smell the wine, or smell chamomile and then smell the wine. And so people actually train themselves. Wine is so unique in that it actually has those components that are found in things like, non-grape items like peaches. You actually smell peach in wine, and it is there, the same chemical component that makes up a peach. So that is pretty unique. You're not going to get that in milk or orange juice or some other beverage. So in that way, wine is kind of magical, and that it goes back thousands of years and has always been part of bringing people together and ritual and community. So I try not to intimidate people with those descriptions. And sometimes you can turn someone off, like leather turns you off.
Right.
One time I said, it's got a real custard texture. And this woman went, I hate custard. And I was like, no, not custard. So
I got to describe it somehow. There's, and it's interesting because typically everyone has a label that today I go towards vanilla. Vanilla and blackberry are kind of that's where my palate goes. So.
Well, the vanilla comes from oak.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yeah. But one thing, if you're a person who's trying to describe to a professional what you like, I would stick to, if you can give them an example, that's always great. Like, oh, I love Merlot. That will help us so much. But if you can't give them an example, then start with weight. Like, do you like a light wine, a light body? Do you like a really rich, full, heavy in the mouth? And if somebody doesn't know what that means, I always say, well, think of skim milk, whole milk, and cream. Cream being the rich, full, right, and skim milk being the light. It's a texture, but it's also the weight on your palate. And so we start with that with someone who doesn't know. And then you might talk about, well, when you swallow it, do you like a little that mouth-watering lemon acidity or not? Because then we'll go to something that's more fruity and less acidic. So there's ways of figuring it out, but if you're trying to tell someone like me what you like, it would be a good, thing to start with weight.
Right. Okay. Now, last question.
Yep.
My favorite question. I get asked it all the time because I am a 100% true believer in organic wine, as you know, but when I don't drink organic wine, I get a bit of a headache. the next day. I was just saying to my girlfriend that I had 2 glasses of wine, of a non-organic wine last night. I can feel it. I felt congested. I didn't like how I felt. I can drink an entire bottle. I don't like to drink an entire bottle, but I can drink an entire bottle of organic wine and I won't feel anything. And I don't feel like I have that sugar in me from organic wine. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I just feel so much better when I drink organic wine. What's your thought on that? I'm sure hangovers too. I'm sure you've been asked that over and over.
Well, there's 2 things going on there. One might be some people have allergies to certain additives. Commercial yeast is much more prominent of an allergen than sulfur. And commercial yeast is used all the time and it affects the flavor of the wine. So that's another thing that people who are hardcore organic farming, they're not using commercial yeast. They're letting the yeast there's yeast everywhere in the air. That's how you make sourdough bread. You capture that yeast that's already in there. But in a vineyard, you get the same dominant yeast, vintage after vintage. And those are the yeasts they isolate and they will use for their wine every year. And so you're not using any commercial yeast. That's one thing. The other thing is you're not getting the additive. So if US allows 75 different additives, there's so much in there that you could be reacting to that you're asking for trouble. It's like eating processed food all the time and not expecting to feel good the next day. You're not going to. You might be able to do it one night, but if you do it every night, you're going to be in trouble.
Your body's not going to like you.
Your body is not going to take it. So it's a buildup of toxins and you get a headache, or there's just too much of something in there. Whereas the natural wine, it's stripped down. It's the juice squeezed from the grape, which is good for you. Grapes have a lot of antioxidants. So it's actually, blueberries, excellent for you, antioxidants. So grapes are like that. And if they're treated in a hands-off method with organic farming, I think it's just, it's an easier product to absorb.
Well, I know I've turned on a lot of people to organic wine, and I love doing that. And hopefully we have other people that are interested in it here as well, because there's so many wonderful organic wines, sustainable wines. And I know I have friends that come to Buffalo from different states and stay with us, and I've taken them to your store and they box up.
It's fun. It's like, it's not punitive, raise your glass and toast to saving the planet when you're drinking organic wine.
Well, and I purposely brought a glass on this for the purpose of showing you La Masa, right? One of our favorite wines at the store is Paula we have many favorite wines in her store. When I talk about Paula's store, her store is probably it's small, but she has so many different boutique wines there that are so delicious.
We're pretty packed right now. We're coming up on our 6th anniversary. So we have about 1,500 different wines at this point. And we have a website which you can surf and
I'll post that.
Bring the different categories that you're interested in. So
yeah, maybe you have somebody in New York State you want to send a gift to. You can send them a case of wine. You ship by case or half a case, or how is there a minimum?
No, we do it all.
Okay.
Generally, it's, people don't buy more than a case at a time, but sometimes, so any number we really will ship if we have it. So
yeah, so maybe you want to send some wine to your mother, your aunt, your sister, your father, your brother, whoever. Paula can ship that to you. Valentine's Day is coming up on Sunday, so it's a perfect time.
We also have a wine club membership, which is often given as a gift. One is called the birthday suit, which is only natural wine. So it's like totally naked wine. And then the other one is the trust fall, which is staff excited, favorites that we get in the shop, and that's called the trust fall. So we have those 2 wine clubs.
Yeah, it's very fun. So you can call her, which we often do. Just she knows what we kind of like, and we give her a price range, pack the case, and we've done this before when we've gone out of town. We'll take it, and it's so fun just to pick out every bottle. We're supposed to take notes on them, and then we forget because we like them all.
I always say take a picture, but wine is like movies. You know, you got to find a person who works in a retail shop that can get your palate, and then you tell them, I like this, or I love this, or I didn't like that one. And then if they know what they're doing, they'll start to really hone in on your tastes. So that's my advice for really getting the wines that you're going to love is make friends with somebody at your local wine store.
Yeah, it's important, and I know I've done that. So thank you, Paula. This has been wonderful. I know we could probably continue talking, and maybe we'll do it another time in the shop, and maybe we'll do a little wine tasting.
Yes, let's get some wine in there.
Let's get wine in there. When the weather starts getting a little bit nicer, April or May, we'll do something else fun, because I know this is a fun topic for a lot of different people that really want to learn a little bit more about organic wine. So
I'm so appreciative of you taking this up and including us in the work that you do with Green Living Gurus. It's important.
I appreciate that. I know I wear it close to my heart. And if I can help somebody with learning to eat better, drink better, I am a happier person knowing that I've done that. So everybody, drink organic wine. Try to go to the store and get a bottle and experiment a little bit. If you're not in Buffalo, or if you can't ship to New York, experiment with some organic wine from your local store, because I'm sure they have some decent ones. So thank you again, Paula, and I will see you very soon.
All right. Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.